Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and we are coming to you again at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, the first Monday of the month. And next week we will be the program preceding Satori's Black History Corner that comes on twice a month on the second and fourth Mondays. So we're glad to have you with us as always, and hope you'll stay tuned for the next hour. We're going to be talking about two topics basically, which I think you'll find some interest in. We're going to be talking about the president, our great president of these United States. John and I disagree about how great he is.
I mean, I have issues with the guy. I have issues with the guy because he does act like a child at some things, and I wish he would lay off the tweets because he discredits himself.
Yeah.
But other than that, I agree with about 40% of what he does.
Okay, we get 40. If we can get 40% of approval based on what they're saying the poll numbers are, then that's pretty good. But I think the poll numbers are somewhat like they were saying before the election. You know, Donald Trump was getting trounced out there. And then a funny thing happened on the way to the bank, and that was November the 8th when the election was held. And we found out all the polls were skewed because they were polling Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, I always want to see. I took a class on research design, and basically tell you that to get you have to have a huge sampling. And you should really do it randomly. But they have a mailing list they work off, which obviously shows some kind of political alignment. And then when they ask these people the questions, it's like walking to a John Birch's side and be something that just made the trend against socialists.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's basically what you're doing. Or you go to the Communist Party and you're saying we're not getting anybody who's sympathetic to capitalism. And you're just not getting a good view.
Yeah, John. They were asking Democrats, "Are you going to vote for Donald Trump?" And the polls coming back that he's going to lose his shirt in the election. And I will never forget it. On November the 8th, 2016, I wrote in my post on Facebook that this is a day of reckoning and that Donald Trump, at the end of the day, would be the President of the United States. And I was looking at these people that had read their own mail and what they were putting out there. They were reading the feedback from it and skewering their own understanding of what was going on out there in the electorate, failing to understand that the polls were not indicating what we were seeing with our own lying eyes, and that was that Donald Trump was getting trounced in their polls, but everybody was showing up at his rallies.
What's the thing is, what it was, there was an element of fear when they called people or asked them.
Yeah, that's true.
They didn't want to say I'm going to vote for Trump.
That's exactly right.
They didn't want to get attacked because let's face it,
They're going to get beat up.
They're going to get beat up, and let's face it, you should not be asking that right by the polls. You really shouldn't. That's an intimidation thing. It really is.
Yeah, I'm going to be answering. I'm voting for Donald Trump, and they're beating people up for having admitted they even went to the man's rallies. I don't think so.
Another thing is, liberals used to go up, when I used to post something, all these liberals, teachers and stuff, teachers usually, well, you have to hear the other side. So you go to the other side and you actually get some, and then the other group will accuse you of being sympathetic because you actually read what they're saying. And I always found out that years ago, when my family's militaristic, they had people in the military. They had a lot of military people. And what you do is you try to find out as much about your enemy as possible so you know where they got weak spots. Mm-hmm. All right? Well, that's like, now if you do that, you're considered sympathetic to them. No, I'm going to read the material to see where they're wrong. Okay, and I'm going to see on that. I'm not just going to try to attack the personality because that's too easy. And that's actually really an ineffective and unintelligent way of running things. Mm-hmm. But you should find, and a lot of times if you actually see, initially you get a group of people that you oppose, and you actually look at their argument, you're going to find you're not so poles apart. Maybe there's some common ground, and that's good too. But nowadays in this thing, these allegedly intellectual people in the college campuses are actually fueling some of the most unintellectual practices. They don't want to examine the consequences of anything.
John, you can say that again. It is astounding, and we're not in a very good place right now in this country where you have the scholarly community who are supposed to be presenting universal kinds of information, from all different sides of an issue, and they only want to hear one side, and they're training their students to be intolerant of the other point of view. Some of them being so traumatized they need therapy dogs. John, they have to have chocolate served in the classroom now.
I was in high school, and there was a shop teacher there, and he and I got in an argument, and he was trying to make me feel like, because he was using his position of teacher, tried to intimidate me about why I opposed Social Security. And I even maybe I was more in tune and stuff because I've seen politics unfold. My mom's family was leftist. My dad's family was more on the right. So I saw basically the arguments on both sides. I had to. They're family members. And they're not all bad people. They weren't all bad people. And so I say, well, they're not all bad people. They're not. What merit are they saying? And if there's any merit to what they're saying. And I looked at it. So I got in an argument with them back then because years ago they were making this move, try to privatize federal employees' pension funds and Social Security, which I knew was already then. I knew was a drain. I knew it was going to go away as soon as it got there. And I opposed it. Well, luckily the senators and congressmen opposed it back then because their retirement was also, privately invested, not part of the Social Security system too. So the reason why they stepped in was not to help the federal employees so much as they didn't want their money in a sinking ship. Okay, that's what it was, and we recognize that. And then when George Bush the first got in power, he handed over billions of dollars to Social Security fund to Israel and Russia. Okay, I'm still wondering what the hell that has to do with helping the people who are retirees in the United States, but that's beside the point. We give billions of dollars to this now. When the wall was falling, we give money to prop up the Soviet government or whatever it was. I mean, from the Social Security fund. I don't remember him doing that or not. I was like, I'm still okay. How are we? These guys just got done. They're still our enemy, and then you're giving them billions of dollars to do God knows what with. From people's retirement. So I didn't understand that. But see, my family was prescient enough to know that when you give politicians enough money, they're not going to just sit around it and leave it untouched. They're going to use it to buy their own influence for themselves.
Yeah, you give these politicians anything, and it's like give a person an L, it takes a mile, and you give these politicians money or anything else, power, influence, give them anything, and they will abuse it because that's the nature of the art. It's not they say politics is the art of compromise. Politics is the art of lying. And
it's art of screwing somebody over without you getting them technology of screwing them over, and then actually getting in it. And if you're really good at it, consummate politician, they come and thank you for being screwed over by you. That's like the polish. Being a good a career politician.
Yeah, I came here to the studio to talk about the Donald Trump exiting the country out of the Paris Accords that was signed in 2015. And I also want to talk about the onslaught that's going on in Europe in terms of the continued jihadist problem they have in Europe, and in which none of the leaders in Europe seem to get what's going on. And I don't think Theresa May, the Prime Minister of England, has a clue about what's going on. And that's also true of Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel of Germany. These people are basically brain dead, and that's the state of leadership. State of leadership in the West, and I'm not laughing about that. I'm just laughing at the ridiculous state in which we are in, and we don't recognize the state we're in because we don't seem to get what's going on around us. And although the evidence is conclusive and consistent, 100% of the evidence is clear, we don't seem to be able to figure out what it is we're dealing with. And I will tell you this on the QT and Running, that in my Facebook post today, I did a narrative. It's going to be a 3-part series, and when I do a 3-part series, it's because there's so much information that's got to be shared on the topic that you can't do it not only in not one segment of a Facebook post, but even in 2 segments. And so this is going to be a 3 segment post, and the title of which is that the death knell of the West has already been sounded by political correctness. And I make that allegation because I don't think the West is really willing to save itself, given the trauma the West has had, the psychological trauma that the West has had, in terms of being able to come to grips with its own past, to which it has been shamed into a denial of anything that it did right in the past, and now it's beginning to unravel because of this appeal to Western guilt, which has been taught and drilled into the public consciousness to the exclusion of teaching anything about what the West did right and what was unique to the West. And those kinds of conversations have been held. So then what you have here is a person walking around with trainload of guilt, and they want to disavow what the West stands for. And through this capitulation of its own existence, we're seeing the West, in fact, through political correctness, plotting its own death. And I wanted to write about that and to try to point out some of the particulars about it, because we are going out of existence, almost committing suicide. In fact, we are committing suicide.
It's embracing the ideas. I mean, Nietzsche talked about that, master and slave morality.
Yeah.
And anything that's supposed to empowers the person, so they become the leader, they becomes the master, if you will. They start finding, if they find those attributes in themselves, they turn it and make it now evil to have those attributes. Instead of asking what you're going to do with them, if you just possess those attributes, they're now classified as evil, which is a transcendent term. It's not like bad, which I had a bad tire on my car, or I had a bad part of my car. It's vilified. It's given more importance. In some term, that term.
Yeah, I was having a conversation last night as the Cavaliers were getting stumped again in the basketball game. And, some of my friends, they know I don't watch basketball until it counts, because my time is too valuable to be sitting there for 82 games in a season. Then they got all these playoff games, and you finally get to the game that actually going to determine who the champion is. The reason why sports is played is to find out who the champion is going to be. So why am I watching all these games when the championship game is played at the end of the season? And I have sports that I watch, but I watch it in order to determine the championship. Boxing, I determine that in 48 minutes. If you take the 3-minute rounds and then the 12 minutes in between rounds that you have in the rest period is in 48 minutes, and the 36 minutes of the 12 rounds, and then the 12 minutes in between the rounds, and after 48 minutes, within an hour, the champion is. So I watch boxing for that reason, but I don't have time to be sitting there watching basketball for a whole season. But what happens at the end of the season, some of my friends know that I'm interested in the championship, so they want to invite me over, so that and can't hardly wait for the game to get over, so they can then try to jam some of their nonsense by me about what's going on in the world, and they're going to educate me about some of the positions that they know I take publicly. And so after the game was over, they want to show me some video or some person is up there emoting nonsense, and they're going to convince me of the errors of my ways, which is what happened last night. I was over at this one guy's house until I think 4 o'clock in the morning. The game started last night at 8 o'clock. And after the Cavaliers got stomped on again by the Warriors, and what would be a 4-game series the way it's going right now, unless the Cavs can bounce back on Wednesday, and I don't see how they can do it with all the firepower that's arrayed against them, because they got 5 shooters out there, and they can shoot from all parts of the court, and you got Kevin Durant. And this guy wants a championship ring so badly that he didn't want to build a team. He wanted to go on a team already built and then get a ring from going through a backdoor approach. That's some kind of champion for you. But he's going to be able to get a ring because he's on a team with Steph Curry and all those other great players they had over there already. He went and joined that championship team, and they just trouncing the Cavaliers. But after the game was over, about what, 11:30, 12. I'm over at this guy's house until 4:30 in the morning, and a couple of people over there, and we are arguing this nonsense about Islam, and they didn't know one thing of what they were talking about, and they're gonna educate me about what I'm. In fact, I took this book over there knowing that they wanted to talk about that. So I took this book over there by one of the scholars in this country, Robert Spencer. And you might know some of his works. This book is called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam, and he has in parentheses, and the Crusades, because he's talking about the Crusades as one of his topics in the book. But he's also written another, all of his books are fantastic, but another one of his outstanding books was this book called Steph Jihad. And meaning that jihad is not just taking a plane or as it was on 911, 4 planes, and trying to ram them into buildings. 3 of those planes having succeeded in doing that, and then one of the planes went down in the field in Pennsylvania and killed approximately 3,000 Americans. And of course, when you're fighting a war, the goal of a war is to fight your enemy until the enemy lays down his weapons or until the enemy submits. And we don't recognize that the war is being fought in a very different way than was fought during the time of the Crusades or the encroachment of Islam going into Europe, and they were battling there at such places as the Battle of Tours in 732. Let me see if that's right. The Battle of Tours in 732, when Charles Martel or Charles the Hammer, met the scourge, the Islamic scourge in the Pyrenees Mountains, and called Charles the Hammer because at the Battle of Tours he hammered them back down into the Iberian Peninsula, and they were there for another 700 years. Being finally expelled from Europe after 700 years being in the Iberian Peninsula, run out in 1492. And of course the Crusades would have started in 1096. Part of that battle was the Crusades. And people are now trying to pretend that the battle was about Islam having to defend itself against colonialism, imperialism, and racism of the West, when if that were true and they were fighting in a defensive battle, then why are they in Europe? What is Islam doing in Europe during that period of time? And if they're defending themselves, why are the defenses not going on in the Middle East but going on in Europe if they're fighting a defensive war? It was the Christians fighting a defensive war.
Another thing is, too, I ran into academics when I was over at Mott, for people who call themselves academic or consider themselves academic, who had this misconception that Islam was older than Christianity.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's like, are you kidding me? I mean, and I was just out of high school. I had very limited contact with, history classes and stuff. I mean, I only took a couple in high school, requirements, American history largely. But I was in DMLA, which is a Masonic organization, and it was named after the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. So because of that, you got to learn a little bit about the Crusades and a little bit about that kind of era, And I was puzzled by that, because these college people thought that it's an older culture. Well, Islam did tap into like the jinn and all that other stuff that's tied in now, mixed in with Islam, although it is considered it's kind of heretical actually to talk about that stuff and magic and all that. But it's kind of intertwined, just like Christianity's got a blend of paganism in it too. But it's like basically, it just like really puzzled me. I kept on going back to the history books, like, well, let's see, this started this, the Christianity started here, and then they started 600, 700 years after the fact. So how is this Islam supposed to be more revered because it's supposed to be an older tradition and has such a great esteem past? I look at it, how can they actually, they're turning a pig's ear into a silk purse. I mean, they really are.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to deal with our own past. So there's a lot of flaws in European history.
No question about it.
But see, we take credit or discredit or own up to that. The East, the people from the East largely are like exempted from examining themselves. That's a big difference.
Yeah, well, we do own up to the mistake, sometimes to a fault, in terms of taking on more baggage than we should, because there's no culture that's going to be perfect, and we are sometimes too self-critical of the things that have happened that went awry, and we do not want to give ourselves credit for the things that we did as unique in the world. And we talk about slavery. And everyone wants to say that slavery was one of the curses that we had in the West. No one wants to talk about the fact that the scourge that was a universal scourge that is talked about, by the way, and a very good job on that was the real story of slavery that is written in Thomas Sowell's book, page 111, chapter 4 of that book. And he talks about the universality of slavery, and he writes about how the West was the place which took a moral stand against slavery when no one else in the world, nor the culture in the world, had done that, because of the universality of the practice. And slavery was as old as human beings being on the planet. So it was a practice that was universal, that was practiced on every continent, among every people. There were no exceptions to it. Certainly no exceptions in Africa. And nobody talks about that before Europeans arrived in Africa as to involve themselves in a slave trade that was already existent on the continent of Africa before the Europeans arrived. Had been in practice in Africa by Muslims who had gone into Africa starting in 639 AD. And from that 700-year period until the arrival of the Portuguese in Africa in 1441, the slave trade in Africa, which was internal to Africa and also was going across the Sahara to the Middle East, no one talks about that. They want to talk about the European involved in it. And you can go and read a number of good works. I think one of the more interesting ones would be the book written by one of the Africanists in England by the name of Bassett Davison, one of the best writers and one of the clearest writers. A number of books. One of his works called Black Mother, which he later on changed it to the African slave trade. And that book is correctly titled The African Slave Trade, because we have gotten confused about the African slave trade and have coagulated this slave trade with the colonial period, which is much later, 400 years later, in Africa by Europe colonizing Africa. And they want to claim that the slave trade was congruent with the colonization of Africa. They went in there and they colonized Africa, and out of it they pulled the slaves out of Africa, which is a totally misconception of history in Africa. The slave trade was not the same time period as the colonial period. The colonial period, in fact, Africa, if you go read volume 4 of A General History of Africa put out by UNESCO, you'll see where they say in chapter 1, I think, of that book, that Africa was the last continent to be colonized by Europe.
Yeah, no, I know Germany and Italy made inroads into Africa to colonize, but that was in the late 1880s or 1870s.
You have that right.
And so that was a much long, it wasn't concurrent with the 1600s when
not at all.
Those merchant companies are developing all over the world.
You have, say, John, you do the reading, and I have a lot of associates who want to do the talking without doing the reading first, and it's a waste of my time. And I was over there wasting my time last night. But they want to talk, so I'm willing to talk to anybody. But I'm not willing to allow nonsense to be put across the to be in the discussion without any documentation. And so a lot of it is just to keep asking for the documentation for the claims that they make, and they don't have any documentation, but they want to be experts in an area in which they're totally unqualified. And it requires a lot of patience to sit there and listen to this nonsense. But that's what they want to do, so you engage it.
I'm puzzled by, I don't want to go too far off topic for you, but I'm always puzzled by blacks identifying with Islam being the religion of their ancestors, when actually parts of Africa were one of the first groups of people that converted to Christianity from the time it started, being spread. And then a lot of the areas were then basically converted by sword in Africa, and they were enslaved, and so it was a slave religion enforced by a foreign invader, largely, and yet they embraced this as a religion of their ancestors.
Yeah.
Where Christianity probably might have been more on target.
Yeah, it is total confusion that they would do that, but that's how the history has been written, to exclude that part of history in which Islam comes on the soil of Africa in 639 AD. See, don't forget now that Islam would have had its first, the prophet of Islam would have had the first revelation in 610 AD, and after the flight, which would be 622 AD, in the first year in the Muslim calendar, which is 1 al-Hajra, meaning the flight, al-Hajra being the flight. So that 12 years after the first revelation to the prophet in Mecca, that the prophet fled from Mecca, where the revelation was first given, to Medina, where he fled to, and that's called the flight. And it's the first year of the Muslim calendar, which is 1AH on the Muslim dating and 622 in the Christian dating, is after that particular event. And then 17 years later, which is 639, which would be 7 years after the Prophet's death, you will see Islam now having refocused itself and now has an external focus. It is coming out of Saudi Arabia into the northern part of Africa, arriving in Egypt in 639 and going across the Madrid all the way from Egypt to Morocco. And all of that would be Islam over a period of time. And then after having done that in the 7th century, then in the 8th century, Islam is crossing over 15 miles from Morocco into the rock of what they call the Rock of Gibraltar now, but named after Gibraltar. And the 15 mile that separates at the closest level in the Mediterranean, northern Africa and southern Europe and the Iberian Peninsula, Islam is crossing over into southern Europe as a conquering force, having conquered the northern part of Africa. And of course, the Africans who are there are being pushed down below the Sahara, and that's why there's separation there. Look what you have in the northern part of Africa. No one talks about it, but all of that is Islam, and it's Islam both by acceptance of the book or the acceptance of the sword. In other words, the militaristic aspect of Islam that is conquering northern Africa, and you had a choice of the acceptance of the book or the sword, or what they call the himitude, which would be when you're in a Muslim occupied the country becomes Islam, then in what they call the himitude, I think it's called, you would then be you would pay a tax. If you're not willing to accept Islam, you then have to then pay a tax to Islam in order for Islam to leave you alone and allow you to not be a practitioner of it, but basically they want conversion, because the goal is the caliphate.
And then Egypt and other countries too. If a church falls in disrepair, you're not allowed to repair it, and if it's totally destroyed, you're not allowed to rebuild it. So we're the xenophobes because we question what they're going to possibly do to us, because it's untried. We never had this onslaught really to this extent. But they can be very vehemently anti everybody else, and that's fine because that's their culture. Well, it could be our culture too to be very intolerant. Yeah, we could embrace that just as easily as being so tolerant.
A lot of the intolerance that Islam has, they're projecting onto the West in terms of this whole political construct of Islamophobia, and that is a part of the jihadist movement in terms of labeling any criticism and critique of Islam as being Islamic phobia. There is no Islamic phobia.
Oh, it's like
I dare anybody to point to it.
The word phobia too is interesting. They use it for if you're homophobic. There's two ways you can word phobic. It means to avoid, which means if you're not gay, you would probably avoid gay activity, gay sexual activity anyway. But also the word phobic typically is attached to irrational, inordinate fear. So I mean, that's what they go for, is it inordinate fear. Yeah. That's what they try to make you seem like you're a psychopathic or have some serious neuroses or something if you have questions or concerns or you're not practicing that. See, there is a kind of a co-opting of these psychological and sociological terms. Yeah, that I find disconcerting.
Yeah, John, you've thought very deeply about this, because one of the things that the jihadist movement does, while it is doing the more visible militaristic aspect of Islam in terms of moving toward the caliphate, which means you've got to make the countries which have not yet accepted Islam to submit to Islam. So the military aspect goes on that you saw in Manchester, for example, about 12 days before they had this latest militaristic expression of Islam in London. Before that, you had 12 days before that, you had in Manchester, where 20, I think it was 20 persons that were killed, and 40 some odd others maybe even more than that, were injured. And this is war, but not all of it is like that. There's a lot of jihad is a very patient Islam, where it simply is to go into these countries and begin to Islamize the culture. For example, last night, did anybody notice how many of those basketball players? Look at those basketball players and ask yourself where those beards came from. And isn't that interesting that the people are beginning to look like the persons that are coming out of the Middle East? And that's what the Whistleblower, the magazine that I brought to the studio today, the Whistleblower has as its topic for this month, how Islam is secretly transforming America. And so Islam is not just flying planes in the buildings. It's not just going out there and doing what they did in London last week, and that is getting a van and then speeding up and running zigzag across the London Bridge, which is not falling down. It is England falling down. And they got in the van. After they got through mowing people down in the van, got out of the van, three of these barbarians, and they got out with butcher knives and were in fact stabbing people. 7 persons died there. And the leaders of Europe don't get it. This morning I was reading where Theresa May has come out and said that they've got to change some of the laws so that if anyone goes awry and all of that, then they take their citizenship away from them. But if they go awry, the damage has already been done. That's why you would talk about taking the citizenship, because the act has already been engaged in. And what does that do for the people's safety, in whose name the government exists to do the number one and primary function of government, which is to protect the people who live underneath the authority of the government. The first thing the government has to do is protect the people. Otherwise, there's no need for the government to exist.
Is it kind of arrogant for them to, when we're saying about we draw attention to those kind of incidents, those kind of actions over there, and also here, our government turns on us and calls us racist and homophobic or Islamophobic, and then denigrates the people they're supposed. And then these same people out here want to give these governmental people more power over their lives when they fail so miserably doing that which they've already been entrusted with.
John, it is an abdication of the government responsibility, where it appears to the public as if it's taking some strategic and very systemic action against the terror that they're claiming to be combating, when they're not taking any action against it. You see, even this thing that Theresa May did, where she said we've got to go and change some of the laws, and they want to now look at maybe possibly banning the burqa. These are non-responses. One of the things they're not going to do is that they're not going to come out and make the clear claim, based on all the evidence, of the incompatibility of Islam in Western countries.
I'd like to ask these people on the progressives. Okay, you want inclusion of gays, lesbians, transgender, people who want to live alternate lifestyles. Yet you want to also bring in this group of people who basically don't have that mindset. How are you going to reconcile this? I mean, how is this going to be carried out? I mean, it's like, okay, American culture had basically a Christian basis or bias in some people's eyes, but it was predictable. You knew what you could say or do publicly, and you avoided doing that, or if it was going to cause too much on you, pressure on you. And so but you still could do it. I mean, gays still existed. They lived with each other and stuff like that. So I mean, they weren't as, I don't see where they always say about hate crimes and stuff. Hate crimes are committed by everybody on everybody else every day. Every day. I don't see how you're going to stop it. I really don't. But now you try to reconcile these such divergent groups of people. It's impossible to do. You can't even get family members to forgive each other for past actions, and they have blood as a unifying force. How can you get these people from such wide divergent groups and such hate-filled, and they're taught hate, That's their identity, is this to hate this other group. How are you gonna reconcile all these people?
You're not going to be able to do it, and these leaders are derelict in their responsibilities by bringing these people into Western cultures, as they've done in Europe. I'll read this to you here at this point from the book by Robert Spencer, and you should read some of Robert Spencer's work because he's done tremendous research on Islam.
I have that book too. It's a really good one.
Yeah, very good book. And the book on Steph Jihad is a masterpiece. But I have a lot of respect for him because he's not politically correct. In the chapter called "The Crusade We Must Fight Today," under the Islamization of Europe, he makes this comment. I think it's very, very dramatic. He says, Muslims are accomplishing today what they failed to do at the time of the Crusades. Conquer Europe. How quickly is Europe being Islamized, he asked. So quickly that even historian Bernard Lewis, another expert, who has continued throughout his honorable career to be disingenuous about Islamic radicalism and terrorism, forthrightly told the German newspaper, Europe will be Islamic by the end of the century, or maybe sooner. If demographic trends continue, France, Holland, and other Western European nations could have Muslim majorities by the middle of the century. Meanwhile, these growing Muslim minorities are increasingly assertive and disruptive. And he goes on to list some of the things that have occurred in Europe where there's been this disruption, and yet they come out here talking about the burqa. They don't talk about the incompatibility of Islam in Western countries, because Islam is not compatible in Western countries, and where it belongs is in the Middle East. And they've invited this scourge onto the land of Europe. And what Spencer is talking about is that they are conquering through the invitation of the Western leadership what they could not do on the battlefield, when the West knew that when they were fighting on the soil of Europe, the West knew that it had to stand up and fight and resist the incursion, the encroachment in Europe. And he asked a question in this book, by the way, about what would happen now in terms of this mobilization of the Christian West, and as they did during the time of the Crusades. And he makes a statement. He's correct in saying it, that would be impossible to do right now, because they don't even understand why they need to, in fact, mobilize. But Islam is mobilized.
That's the thing is, when you're dealing with an enemy whose mindset's totally different than yours, it's hard for people, as the term goes, to put their mind around that. They see, because we're caught up in basically finding out which new gadget we can buy, and if we're going to be like keeping up with the Jones in that respect. These people are basically saying any kind of gains they make is significant gains, either materially or geographically. And they don't understand that mindset. We don't understand. They see the game totally differently. They see things totally.
They are totally focused on the objective, and the objective is in front of all Muslims. One of the person last night was saying that I was, they try to run this on you, that you're either Islamophobe or you're a racist. And I don't need to defend. I don't go into these kinds of defense. I don't think I have to defend anything. I'm quoting. I am aware of the historical record, and I think I know it pretty well. And so these games you run where you start getting away from what is the evidence, and you start making the accusations. So that becomes a conversation, and it gets you into a discussion about you denying that you are representative of this view that has something to do with an antagonism toward anyone. I have a. I was saying last night, I have a doctor who is a Muslim. She's wearing the. She doesn't wear the hijab, but she's wearing the. She has a hair covered and all of that. That doesn't bother me. But just because she is my doctor does not mean I do not recognize, as nice as she is, and she's a wonderful person, but it does not take my eyes off the fact that there is a jihadist intent in her presence. And if she's not, does not have that intent, she cannot be a Muslim.
And that's the thing is, see, Christianity has been watered down. And but Christianity, the book, never encouraged slaughter of people who didn't convert. If you read Christ's words, if you go into an area and you preach to them, they don't hear your words, turn into shake the dust off your feet. God will judge. God will left.
Yes.
He never say go back with your gang, put a sword through their throats, and make them accept me. He never says that. So, but it's been done because the population of Christians at that time didn't have the book in which was recorded what he said. But let's face it, as soon as they did, they went, how can you justify this? And that's how it diminished. Because they get in the book. But to the Quran for the most part is, like I said this last week, I think, it's written in a form of Arabic that most Arabic-speaking people currently are very unfamiliar with.
Yes.
Very archaic.
There's a lot of misdirection that goes on, even in the translation of the Quran out of the Arabic into English and other languages. And I don't read Arabic, but I do read the works of those like Brigitte Gabriel, who's written 2 books, one called Because They Hate, and another one of the classics is They Must Be Stopped. This is written by a person who lived in Lebanon and is now in the United States, a very dynamic a person trying to warn the West, by the way, and about what is really coming if they do not get a grip on what is taking place in terms of the caliphate coming into, the people coming in with the caliphate in their mind, coming into the country at the invitation of these Western leaders who are basically brain dead and who do not know history. And certainly fulfilling this proverbial statement that those who don't know history are doomed to repeat his mistakes, and they don't know history, and that's why they think that because they're not coming in with the intent is they're coming in, they're claiming they're coming in to join Western lifestyle. They're not coming with the jihadist intent. And they let them in because the guards let down because it don't seem like they have any. I mean, even vetting these people is some people are upset about saying they have to be vetted. Or when Donald Trump was saying that he wanted to, restrict and ban Muslims coming to the country from 7 countries, now 6 countries. I think that somebody told me that Iran has been taken off the list for some reason. Does not mean that he believes that Islam in Iran does not pose a threat, because we see what he did when he went over to the Middle East and he went to the Sunnis over in Saudi Arabia first, and was using that as a battering ram against the Shia in Iran, and going to use the Sunni problem with the Shia as a way of doing an alliance with the Sunni and Israel, and that way they could have an alliance that would be arrayed against what is happening in Iran with the nuclear weapons and things of that sort.
But
because Iran is not Arab, it's Persian.
See, I was talking to a woman. I go to an Assyrian church, Assyrian Church of the East. And I was talking to a woman who actually is from his family's from Turkey originally, and they fled because of persecution of Christians into Iraq. They were there in the 1900s. Mm-hmm. And she was telling me Saddam Hussein was very pro-Christian. He was actually kind of hated by the Muslims.
Yes.
He always sided with the Christians. His core advisors from economic issues and all that were all Christians. His personal doctor were Christians. They're Chaldean Christians or whatever, but they were Christian.
Yeah.
And it's ironic that we have a president, we have a past president who people told has been such a great Christian, George Bush II, and he wanted to remove Saddam Hussein, and basically, he was an evil man. He did violence against other people. I know that. Yeah. But then again, I don't know what exactly my government does. Okay, so I wouldn't want somebody stepping in. Either they did bad things, I wouldn't want them to stepping in and taking our leaders out and removing us in the process as well. And I can understand. What good did we do to Iraq by removing Saddam Hussein? Is that country more stable? No, it's not.
No, and neither is Libya. The reason why Saddam and also Bashar al-Assad in Syria. The reason why they would be pretty much beholden to the Christians, because the Christians pose no threat to them in terms of a fundamentalist expression of their religion, wherein these secular leaders like Hosni Mubarak. I was in Egypt in 1984. I was very much aware when I was there that Mubarak was a secular leader and how he was following in the footsteps of Anwar Sadat, who had been assassinated in 1981 for signing the Camp David Accords in 1978. And 3 years later, they caught up with him at a parade, and they assassinated him out in public for having signed that accord with the Jews. So when I was over in Egypt in 1984, I had a lot of conversations when I was there. And a lot of persons were trying to tell me this snow job, but I understood what was going on there, and I knew what the history was. And I admired what Mubarak had done, because when he came in, he did not tear the accord up that Anwar Sadat had paid for with his life. He continued that accord. Did not tear it up, but continued the secular understandings of it against the jihadists who wanted to tear that up and then continue this jihadist attack against Israel, because Israel, the way the Arabs see it, is that Israel is on Arab land. And that problem is never going to be resolved. They can talk all this peace talk all they want to. There's not going to be any peace in the Middle East. Although it's good to, a fresh attempt was in fact tried by Donald Trump, because he was trying to play off of some of the tensions inside of the Arab world, and since they are not a unity in terms of the Muslim world, Iran is not Arab. Iran is Persian. And so there is an ethnic distinction there, and there's also a Islamic distinction here, because the Sunnis make up 90% of Muslims, and the Shia make up the other, and there are different aspects of Shia, but they make up the other 10%. So then there's some possibility to move into an alliance there. But in terms of resolving the problems of the Arabs and the Jews, it will be an enemy of my enemy situation that gives them an alliance against Iran, because Iran poses a threat with its nuclear weapons. But there's not going to be any forgiveness for Israel being in the Middle East on what they consider to be Arab land. That's not going to happen, because then you are capitulating to Muslims and non-Arabs, and that is not what Islam calls for.
Well, wasn't before Sadat in Egypt, wasn't that Nasser who was the leader?
Yeah, and that was Gamal Nasser, and I forget the other person's name that after Nasser, because when Nasser died, there was another person that came in that preceded Sadat. See, Sadat was basically Sadat's mom was from Sudan, but of course, if your mom is from Sudan and your dad is Arab, then because it's a dad in Islam that the identity is through the father. That's why I understand people talking about Barack Obama. Barack Obama's father is Muslim. I couldn't understand why they were talking about him being a black American. He's a Muslim from his dad is from Kenya, and it matters not that he was born in the United States. The fact is that if your father is a Muslim, then whatever you claim is for is black. They don't claim skin color over the Muslim religion. So Barack Obama was a Muslim operative in the White House, and I made that claim in 2009. And I got all kinds of, feedback and negative feedback from it. I stand on that claim all these years later. This is now 8 years after that point. I still make that claim, because that's exactly what this man is. This man was a fraud, posing as a person that was a recipient of the history passed down from the Emancipation Proclamation, Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War, and all. It had nothing to do with Barack Obama. The man had imposed that history on himself. He had nothing to do with that history, and he's an American based upon his mom, and his dad had nothing to do with any of that history. His dad's history is over in Kenya, and that would be the British, in terms of their any of the colonial practices there would have nothing to do with the colonial practices that were here in this country based on blacks in the United States. So that was a grafting of that history onto his own landscape. So he could run for president under the view they were voting for an authentic and legitimate black person based upon the history we were trying to get past, and Obama moved into the breach and claimed that history as his own. He was a total fraud, he's a total imposter, and I called him on it. And I could care less who does not like that.
See, that thing is some people would just say, well, he's one of us. And so, that's cool. Doesn't matter his real background. He looks like us.
Yeah.
And that's I just
the
think,
skin color.
But the thing is, I don't see where he's ever suffered privation for having darker skin. Matter of fact, he grew up in a very upper elite world. So I don't understand why. I mean, I grew up, but he was in the circle of very learned, allegedly educated people, and he went to institutions where he basically, if he had to be on his own family's income, he would never be able to afford to go there.
Barack Obama is a total imposter and a total fraud. And I called him out on it just like I called anyone else out on it if they were frauds and total imposters as well. I don't make any distinction in terms of what the truth is. And if the truth is if I'm stating the truth, then 10,000 angels dancing on the pin in the head of a needle does not change that fact. And so I called him on it at that time, and I call him on it now. I've not changed my mind on it because the facts have not changed. This man was impersonating, and he was not carrying out anything that had an agenda with the black community, and dismissed the black community. But because of the skin color, blacks play that game as much as anyone plays that game, and therefore anything this man did was overlooked. I'll tell you another thing that's overlooked now that we're talking about that, and that is what Bill Miles said last week. If that had been said by anybody that was on the right, there would be a demonstration in front of the office right now if they had said that at a studio. And when Bill Maher said that he was a house nigger, have you heard anything, any storm clouds over that? If that had been said by someone like Sean Hannity, they'd be out there demonstrating right now and demand this man be fired.
He'd have been dead. They would have probably found somebody who would get into him.
There would have been some real physical danger he would have been in. And Bill Myers has gotten a pass like he didn't even say that comment. And I don't even know if he even apologized for it.
He apologized.
Did he apologize for it?
I heard that, they were recording.
Yeah, that was, but that was a statement. Nobody's going to demand that he be fired because he's got the right, he's on the right side, of the political agenda. And so that can be overlooked. Just like the comment made by Kathy Griffin can be overlooked. She can claim there's nothing funny about cutting off the president's head, figuratively speaking and symbolically, and then having a very stern look on your face and holding it up and claim that it's all about humor and it had no other meaning in it and so on and so forth, with no message in back of it. And they have all this venom against this president on the left, and you just cannot even imagine what would have happened if someone had done that and had a proverbial something that would look like the image of Barack Obama, for example. And you're doing that, and then you don't lose your job. I mean, there are all these people coming to defend this woman for this unconscionable behavior. But that's what the left is really about. And you can get away with a lot of things if your politics are right. But if your politics are wrong, then anything you do, therefore, is wrong. And that's why Donald Trump is getting all this venom for doing what really, things that really benefit this country in terms of his his positions on trying to ban persons coming into this country. They don't have a right to come in here just because they are from a certain part of the world. This country has determined who can come in this country. And these judges are trying to act like they have the right to come here because the Constitution is a worldwide document that protects the rights of all the people in the world. This is the pure nonsense on the part of these judges.
These learned people think that on that tablet of the Statue of Liberty, give us entirety poor and all this stuff, wretched refuse and all that. That's not the Constitution. That was a poem written by Emma Lazarus. Okay, so it's not part of the Constitution. It's not part of the
give me
legal
your
system.
tired.
Yeah, so I mean, and my great grandparents came to this country. It was great to see that. But the thing is, let's face it, they came from across the ocean. It was a lot. You didn't swim across that.
Right.
Okay? You had to come in here. They were in quarantine.
They went to Ellis Island, by the way.
Yeah, they went to quarantine for so many days.
Yeah.
They got checked for diseases. They came here. They didn't become part of the problem. They didn't get on welfare because welfare didn't exist.
And they didn't break into the country.
No.
They came here through a process, and we determined at Ellis Island who would be the final ones allowed in, and those that were rejected were returned back to the source of their having come here. You have to have, if you don't have any control of your borders, you don't have sovereignty. And they want to make Donald Trump the bad guy because he wants to protect the American people. You can see where we're going if we don't arrest this tendency to be apologetic even for our existence. The other thing I want to say before I get off the air, real quickly now, and that is Donald Trump having pulled the United States out of the Paris Accords that was signed in 2015. I was talking to these friends last night, and I asked this one person who was just so against anything Donald Trump did. I asked him if he agreed that the idea of the global warming was a hoax. And he agreed it was a hoax. So then I asked, if you then agree that it's a hoax, then do you disagree that Donald Trump should have pulled the United States out of the accord if you agree it's a hoax that we're involved in? And here was the contradiction. He admits that the climate change hoax is that's a real hoax that's taking place. At the same time, he disagreed with pulling out of what he agreed was a hoax. This is the kind of irrationality that goes on the left, because it's ridiculous to say that you recognize global warming as a hoax. And what it really is about is a redistribution of wealth, where they're talking about in a 30-year period of time, maybe the temperature will go down by 1.78 degrees at a cost of what? $100 trillion? Can you justify that kind of expenditure and treasure being spent for that low result? The global warming is nonsense, but the irrationality is such. We want you to keep watching everything because we're losing a lot of our national identity in this political correctness, and we've got to correct that before we can have a future in the West, because the West is losing it. And I want you to pay attention and stay tuned to that. Okay, stay tuned for the other programs here at allpointstv.com as well. We want you to, as always, follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you will never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.